year where we've fully exited the COVID crisis and theaters are well back into the swing of things, as well as studio pushback through various Hollywood strikes, this was definitely an interesting year for me to watch more movies. And I'm going to talk about a few of them that I watched in this video. This is not all of the movies that I watched this year. These are just the ones that I feel like talking about. And minor spoiler alert, I don't even like all these movies. Just wanted to throw in some variety of opinion in here. And speaking of spoilers, I am going to go into spoilers in almost every movie I talk about in this video. So if you haven't watched one of the movies here and you want to, then go watch it. And please come back and watch what I have to say about it. Please. So without further ado, let's just get into it.
Fun have a period after their band's name. Now that's cool.
The first movie I watched this year was Megan, though I refer to it as Mithrigan because that's how it's spelled. I've seen a lot of people that enjoyed this movie ironically because of how cheesy it is, though it plays it super straight. And there were a few moments, especially in the editing, that I thought were kind of funny, but for the most part, I did not get that out of this movie. For the most part, I found this movie to be pretty dull. The script isn't that special. We've seen this premise a million times before. It's kind of predictable. The effects on Megan herself were pretty inconsistent. Sometimes she looked pretty good, and other times she didn't. And those moments where she didn't were the ones that made me chuckle a bit. Like when she crawls on all fours in the woods to kill that kid. I didn't dislike this movie per se. I thought most of it was just fine. But I saw such strong reactions to this. And after I saw it, I was just like so confused at it. Again, I didn't hate it, but you're not going to catch me thinking about this movie after I edit this video. I don't really recommend it. I watched Knock at the Cabin. It is the first M. Night Shyamalan movie I have seen, and this movie makes him look better than I've been told. I'm not ruling out his other movies being bad, but I haven't seen those movies. And I have seen Knock at the Cabin, which I don't think is bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. The story is interesting at first, but it definitely got a bit more predictable as it went along. The script is not amazing. Like, some of these characters explain and re-explain certain ideas that the audience could have figured out by themselves. But definitely what keeps me interested is the acting. Everyone is acting their ass off, and it's the best aspect of this movie. I was particularly enamored by Dave Bautista's performance. I really like that he's been spreading his little acting wings and going beyond what he's most known for. So while the characters might not have the best lines, the actors sell those lines in a way that makes them all feel like they don't want to be in this situation. And that's pretty engaging for a psychological horror. Though I'm not particularly enamored by the camera work in this movie, there are a lot of really close-up shots of just the actors' faces, and it just felt awkward. So all in all, the building blocks were not amazing in and of itself, but the builders gave it their all, and it kept me interested. I slightly recommend it. I saw Cocaine Bear.
I want 35 sequels.
And I was very much going into this movie for a silly, gory fun time. And I kind of got that. When the bear is on screen and causing mayhem, it is very enjoyable. It's a wild bear on cocaine. It's kind of hard to make that concept boring. However, what is really easy to make boring, just like with most monster movies, is the human characters. And the human characters in this are pretty boring, which sucks because there are a lot of human characters in this. There was this one guy that showed up towards the end of the movie, and I was just thinking, who even is this guy? And like, this movie is loosely based on a real story where some cocaine was dropped into the woods and a bear nom-nommed it up. So really would have been fine if they just focused on the characters trying to find the missing cocaine. Throw in a few other random people just to get killed. But no, we have to follow like 3 or 4 separate plot lines, and by the time the third act came around, the bear itself felt pretty secondary. The plot lines themselves were fine, I guess, but I don't understand why they decided to focus on that when the movie is called Cocaine bear. I want to see the bear get wild and kill people. So the scenes with the bear are fun, but if I didn't watch this in the theater, I probably would have been scrolling on my phone when the humans came on. I don't really recommend it. Rye Lane is in my ears and in my eyes. That's the best transition you're gonna get. I watched Rye Lane and I was very pleased by it. It's a short and fun rom-com with basically the same kind of formula you've seen over and over again in rom-coms, but it's sold on its style and its leads. The style was really fun. Lots of colors, lots of fun camera work. I especially love when we see flashbacks. The flashbacks are very distinctive in this. The fact that this is the directorial debut of Rain Allen Miller is surprising to me because this style and directing was really on point here. And the two leads, David Johnson and Vivian Opara, are lovely together. The chemistry is off the charts. The dialogue is snappy and fun. There are a lot of small moments throughout the movie that really add to their connection. And these two just seem like really fun people to hang out with in real life. I don't really get to see that in rom-coms like these. Also, there's a section of this movie with them that revolves around a vinyl copy of A Tribe Called Quest's Low End Theory, which is an awesome album. W A Tribe Called Quest representation. Anyways, I love this movie. It's on Hulu and Disney Plus. It's only 82 minutes. Go watch it if you can. I strongly recommend it.
You are a human, right? Where did you come from?
I am not in danger, Skylar.
I saw the Super Mario Bros. Movie. I did a parody review of it when it came out.
Donkey Kong is the second greatest fictional character ever made, right behind Funky Kong.
And now it's time for me to give my actual thoughts on the movie. It's fine. Not great. It's not terrible. It's fine. Nothing in it blew me away. Nothing in it was egregiously bad. Actually, I take that back. The music. For some reason, instead of putting a lot of the classic Nintendo music, there's a lot of licensed songs in this that just did not work anytime they popped up. Like, what is the reason for Take On Me being played when we're entering the Monkey Land? Oh, and also Fred Armisen as Cranky Kong just did not work at all for me. Conversely, Jack Black as Bowser is the best part of the movie. It very much felt like they built that character around Jack Black and it paid off in dividends. Concerning the rest of the voice cast, they're fine. At best you have like Seth Rogen who's doing decent as Donkey Kong, and at worst you have like Charlie Day who's just being Charlie Day. But the animation was pretty cool, and as a longtime Mario fan, the Easter eggs were pretty fun. But the story was not amazing, and at points it felt like it was kind of rushed just to fit into that 90-minute time frame. So all in all, it's a neat movie for Mario fans and a perfectly fine kids movie. But not much else. I think it's okay.
Time for Halloween. Don't come to my house or else I'll suck your dick.
I watched Renfield because the concept behind it really intrigued me. Exploring the relationship between Renfield and Dracula as an example of narcissism was really intriguing. So did it deliver? That aspect, yeah. The support group that Renfield goes to is pretty funny, but also pretty compelling, comparing these average situations to Renfield's extreme one. And in that extreme situation, we have Nicolas Cage as Dracula, which is one of those castings that I think of similarly to Jack Black as Bowser, where I'm like, that's definitely not my first choice, but once he was chosen, oh my goodness, is that an amazing idea. And you can tell Cage is having a lot of fun with Dracula on screen. However, for some reason, the writers didn't think that this very interesting angle at a Dracula story was enough to carry the entire movie, because this is just one half of the story. The other half deals with Awkwafina as a cop, being sad about her dead dad and trying to take down this crime family. And it's just so boring in comparison to the main appeal of this movie. Awkwafina's character also forms a relationship with Renfield, which I actually really like the idea of Renfield having this toxic relationship with Dracula and then forming a healthy one with a lover. I think that idea is really cool. Why did they have to give the Awkwafina character an entire subplot though? You have Nicolas Cage as Dracula in your movie, and you want to focus on crime families? And during the third act, when both stories has fully combined, it just kind of felt like too much. And this sucks because there's so much potential in this movie, both in its concept and execution. But I think the writers just had to trust themselves a little bit more. And they didn't seem like they did here. I don't really recommend it.
Bro, you did not.
Stop!
I watched Ghosted, and I wholeheartedly believe that this movie was made so that Apple TV can be like, hey guys, Chris Evans and Ana de Armas in the movie together. You guys like them together. Come watch this movie, please. And man, I totally fell for it. This movie sucks. Chris and Anna have a romance in this movie because everyone loved the romantic aspect of their relationship in Knives Out. And they have zero chemistry together in this. None whatsoever. And their characters have two modes in this movie. Annoying or insane. Anna's character gets more unbearable later in the movie, but Chris's character is just wild the whole way through. Anna's character isn't responding to Chris's texts. So what does he do? He flies from Washington, D.C. to London to surprise her in person. And that's how he gets roped into the spy story, which is equally, if not more stupid than the romance. Little farm boy Chris Evans figures out what the government couldn't because of a house plant. And trust me, that does not make much more sense if you've seen the movie. The comedy in this? The worst offender is definitely a scene with a bunch of cameo actors as bounty hunters. You can't just put Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan in the same movie as Chris Evans and expect me to care. You have to actually give them good things to say too. The effects are also weirdly terrible, with the green screening in particular looking laughably noticeable. Something else that's weirdly terrible? Ana de Armas' wig. Like, what is that? What was the budget for this? And what snacks was it spent on? I just don't like this movie at all. It's not even funny bad, and that's the worst part. Dexter Fletcher directed this, and he also directed Rocket Man, which I love Rocket Man. And I would not be surprised if he just saw this movie as a paycheck. This feels like a low-budget CW movie that also feels corporate in that they're trying to put together so many eggs that they think will make people like it, but they just fundamentally did not know how to cook it. I strongly do not recommend this movie. Now, I know there's a lot of people talking about superhero fatigue recently with how many superhero properties are coming out left and right and but if you'll excuse me for just a bit, I'm going to talk about some superhero movies, starting with
Rocket, no one's calling you a monster. He called me She called me
I saw Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. That's a series this guy is from. And man, the day James Gunn makes a bad superhero movie will be a sad one. But that day is not today, because this movie is great. Being the finale of this series, there needs to be a lot of care put into the character work, which is great because the character work has always been the best part of the series. Every character gets a satisfying conclusion to their stories. Every one of them. But there's also a lot of focus on the darker elements of these characters because this is a darker movie than the others. With, of course, the main focus being Rocket's origin story, which is both very gruesome and very emotional. And the villain behind it all, the High Evolutionary, is delightfully evil. Chukwueze Iwuji brings this irredeemable insanity to the character that is very fun to watch, but also makes me very angry when I see what he did to Rocket. Yeah, I like some villains that have more complexities to them, but sometimes I just want a villain that is just pure evil for the sake of being evil, and this is that. The one character I did have a bit of an issue with was Adam Warlock. For what he is in this movie, he works fine, but excusing what he is in the comics, just how he was built up as something more important in the post-credit scene of Volume 2 makes this feel like kind of a letdown. But once you get beyond that, he's fine in this. And honestly, that's pretty much my only complaint with this, and it's not even that big. The comedy is great as always. The soundtrack is great as always. This is how you use licensed music, Mario movie. And I liked that for once, there was an actual feeling of conclusion to one of these Marvel movies. Great conclusion to a great trilogy. I strongly recommend it.
I'm Spider-Man.
He's black?
I saw Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and for context, I love Into the Spider-Verse. Definitely one of my favorite movies I've ever seen, and very much so my favorite Spider-Man movie. But it ended in kind of a way where I did not feel like there needed to be a sequel. So when I saw that this was announced, I was a little skeptical. But one viewing later, and I loved it. With a tiny caveat, but we'll get to that in a bit. For starters, this is the most visually appealing movie of the year. The amount of various art styles and techniques they use throughout the movie is very impressive. I mean, just taking one look at Spider-Punk explains this point exactly. But then again, I'm very much enamored by everything about Spider-Punk. All the characters in this are really great. I love how much they fleshed out Miles and Gwen in particular. I really like the antagonists of this movie, with Miguel O'Hara serving as a very distinctive addition to the group of Spider-Men, with him being the only one of them that's not funny. And the transformation of the Spot in this was super enticing. The voice acting is good, as it was in the first movie. I especially liked Kieran Sony as Spider-Man India. What else? The Lego scene was really cool. Did you know that scene was made by a 14-year-old? But yes, I do have a little bit of a caveat to this, and that is the ending, which I don't full out dislike the ending like some people do. I just think it falls victim to the part 1 syndrome, in that leaving the story off as it does not make this feel like a complete movie. It definitely more so feels appropriate to jump right into the sequel after finishing this one. And another small thing about the ending that personally kind of peeved me, the last 10 minutes of this movie were full of moments that were like, okay, this is a great cliffhanger to hang on. Let's just stop it right here. And then they just kept going. I might be the only one that thinks that, but I think it. Nevertheless, I do think this is a very amazing movie, and if Beyond the Spider-Verse sticks the landing, I do think that this can be the best superhero trilogy ever. I strongly recommend it.
On the flip!
I watched The Flash, and unironically, this might be the movie that I point to when I want to explain my issues with modern day Hollywood trends. It's a franchise film that's a solo outing, but also not, with a bunch of returning actors from previous movies and bad CGI because the studios work their artists to the bone to meet insane deadlines. I just explained the entire movie right there, but I guess I'll keep going. This is a time travel multiverse movie, which... can they make a Flash movie without it being Flashpoint? There are 2 Barry Allens in this movie, and the main one that we follow is fine for the most part, but this new one from the new universe is very annoying. It's like they wanted to completely get rid of Joss Whedon's version of the Flash, but also amp it up. So they just made 2 characters. Michael Keaton comes back as Batman, and I actually think he was pretty good in this, which is weird because I don't really like the original Batman movie. The thing with his neck, though, is still stupid. Another character that returns is Zod, and Michael Shannon just does not care. And in opposition is new character Supergirl, played by Sasha Calle. And she actually seems pretty interesting, but they don't get to do much with her. And like I said before, the CGI is remarkably bad. And like I also said before, I don't necessarily think it's the artist's fault. They're given these out of this world ideas to create, like the Chrono Bowl, and they have to make it all in a week? Allegedly. And it's not just backgrounds and superpowers. There are a lot of CGI faces in this movie. And I'm not a CGI animator, but I've heard that the human face is the hardest thing to recreate in CGI. And just giving them so little time to do it you're just asking for stuff like this. It's disrespectful to the artists and the audience at that point. Speaking of disrespect, there's a scene where they're peering into all these other multiverses, and we see CGI recreations of George Reeves, Christopher Reeves, and Adam West. 3 people who are all dead, and thus cannot give consent to a scene like this. But the studio just felt like they had to throw in every single thing that they could, because you can't possibly just make an interesting movie with good characters. I think if I keep talking about this, I'm actually going to get mad, so I'm just gonna leave it here. I do not recommend it. Side note, there's a scene in this movie where the Flash puts a baby in a microwave, and I feel like this is just something Ezra Miller really wanted to actually do, but settled for just putting it in the script.
What's the difference between comets, asteroids, meteoroids, meteors, and meteorites?
I watched Asteroid City. It was the first Wes Anderson movie I've seen, and I of course felt obligated to support a fellow Anderson. And speaking beyond my same name bias, I liked it. This is a movie saying quite a few things, but at the same time, nothing. If that makes any sense. It definitely makes sense if you've seen the movie. The messaging is very interesting in that the movie is mostly saying that it's meaningless, which some can see as disappointing, but I see as pretty intriguing. The point's that there isn't a point, and that we're all just acting out how we think things should be without ever truly knowing why. I find that thought process very fascinating. Speaking of acting, the framing of this movie as being a play within this movie is really compelling. And it leads to a lot of very creative scenes where the actors in the play are questioning the story as it's being performed. Speaking of actors, there are a lot of them in this movie. Some I thought did really well, especially Jason Schwartzman and Scarlett Johansson. But there are some characters that we don't really get much out of. Like Tilda Swinton and Willem Dafoe are here, for example. And I usually love them in the movies that I see them in. But they don't really get to do or say much that distinctive. But really, that's my only big complaint with the movie. I also really like the style, especially with the firm camera work, adding to the unnerving feeling of the whole movie. This is a weird movie that requires patience, and I think it deserves it. I recommend it. Side note, Margot Robbie has a really cool scene near the end of this movie. And yes, I did just bring that up just to transition to this next movie.
I'm just me, looking like a meth head on the street. People online still call me Ski.
Oh, who are you?
I'm Liam.
What movie are we gonna see?
Barbie.
Yay!
I saw Barbie, and like most people, I had a giant eye roll when this movie was announced, but when the trailer first dropped, I was immediately hooked. And thankfully, the movie delivered on that. This is my first Greta Gerwig movie, and I know that she's been getting a lot of praise recently, so I'm very excited to see her other works after seeing this. Obviously, a spectacular part of this movie is the presentation, the world, which, admittedly, this is Barbie we're talking about, so if they messed up Barbie lands, that would be kind of impressive. The characters have quite a bit of depth to them while still being lighthearted, with my personal favorite being Ryan Gosling as Ken. And yes, the I'm Just Ken number is an amazing scene. But of course, Margot Robbie is also extraordinary as Barbie. I also quite like the comedy, and that's great considering I would hope that the comedy is great, with this movie being the highest grossing movie of the year and it being a full-on comedy movie. That has not happened since literally the year I was born. But there were a few things I wasn't too big of a fan of. Speaking more into the comedy, Mattel is in this movie with their boss being played by Will Ferrell, and outside of like 1, maybe 2 scenes, they don't need to be in this movie. They aren't that much of a driving force, and they weren't that funny to begin with, in my opinion. Also, I don't know how many feathers I'm gonna ruffle when I say this, but while I like and very much agree with the message, they are very much not subtle about it. The message of this movie is repeated over and over out loud to the characters, and I personally wish they were a lot more subtle with it. But overall, I like this movie very much. I recommend it. It does not need a sequel. Please do not make them do that.
Now I am become sleepy. Go to bed.
What movie did we just watch?
Barbie.
What movie are we gonna watch now?
Oppenheimer.
I saw Oppenheimer. Yes, I did in fact do the thing. Who would have thought that a 3-hour biopic of scientists and politicians standing around and talking would be one of the biggest movies of the year? I sure didn't, but I'm really happy it is. One thing I really love about this movie is that it doesn't stop at just talking about the creation of the atomic bomb. This movie is actually about Oppenheimer. A good chunk of this film is actually politicians grueling him on if he's a communist or not. This gives us a chance to further explore Oppenheimer as a character, his eagerness to create the bomb, and his guilt he feels after it's dropped. We also further explore his relationships. The ones I found the most engaging were with Tom Conti's Albert Einstein, who I did not expect to be as integral to this story as he was, and Robert Downey Jr.'s Louis Strauss. Their performances are amazing. There's so many actors in this movie, and everyone is giving it their all. Not surprisingly, I most enjoyed the aforementioned Robert Downey Jr. and Cillian Murphy as the title character. The music by Ludwig Göransson is amazing and elevated every scene into its peak potential. The framing of this movie I thought was cool too, having Oppenheimer's subjective point of view be in color while the objective truth of what we know happened being in black and white. Having the scenes be framed this way leads to interesting looks at the same event from different perspectives. My favorite scene in this movie is in color, and it's when Oppenheimer has to give a speech after the bomb was dropped, and things get a little crazy. If you've seen the movie, you know what I mean, and if you haven't seen the movie, I don't know, look up the scene on YouTube, or just watch the movie. Watch the movie, actually. Masterful motion picture. I strongly recommend it.
What's wrong with you?
I watched Talk to Me, and I've talked quite a bit in this video already about horror movies that didn't exactly stick the landing for me, which generally is the case for most horror movies I watch. However, Talk to Me is probably one of my favorite horror movies I've ever seen. I was interested but a little skeptical going into this, considering this is a movie made by 2 YouTubers, and YouTubers and movies have not meshed well in the past. But this was delightfully disturbing. My favorite kinds of horror movies are the ones that sit in its uncomfortableness. And this movie practically drowns in it, in large part thanks to Sophie Wilde's performance. Her character is the majority of the movie, and her commitment to it pays off. The other characters are great too, and another thing I usually don't like in horror movies is when the characters do stupid things just to keep the scary things happening. But the characters in this movie are justified in their actions because the ghost talking hand gives them a high when they use it, which I think is really smart. My mom didn't exactly get that part when we were watching it. She was like, I wouldn't have touched it again just after the first time. She said this 5 times during this 90-minute movie. Sorry, Mom, didn't mean to put you on full blast there for a second. Except I totally did, that's why I said it. But there's also a lot of grief being dealt with in this story, which leads to the characters doing irrational and disturbing things. Have I mentioned this movie is disturbing yet? There's this 8-second sequence of a kid being dragged into this kind of purgatory. Got me shaking in me boots, I tell ya. The whole film is also elevated by the camera work and sound design, which are immaculate, specifically at parts where the characters are becoming possessed. There's not much in this movie that's incredibly unique, but it's the way they go about it in this movie that keeps me glued to the screen. I strongly recommend it.
Are you a top or a bottom? Which is better? Top sheets are a scam.
I watched Bottoms purely because the poster said it's from the producers of Pitch Perfect and Cocaine Bear. I had to watch this movie. I just had to. And to my legitimate surprise, I like it. This is a movie about 2 high school lesbians who start a fight club as a ploy to get laid. And seeing as how I actually just watched Fight Club for the first time like a week ago, I now find that premise even funnier. This is a comedy with very good comedy in it. Admittedly, it can be very easy to fumble jokes about queerness and feminism, but the jokes here are good and the delivery is great. A lot of my favorite jokes revolve around Marshawn Lynch as a club supervisor. He kills it and is killing me with the jokes. Rachel Sennott and Ayo Adebri are also great as the leads. Their characters have a surprising amount of depth to them, with Ayo especially having some great emotional moments. I actually really like that the main characters are, at least initially, not good people. They're crude and selfish, like teenagers are, but that's what makes their evolutions by the end so satisfying. This is a silly teen comedy that's quite fun, quite funny, and has quite a bit of heart. I recommend it.
Do you think God stays in heaven because he too lives in fear of what he's created?
I watched Spy Kids Armageddon, and just for context, I grew up watching the Spy Kids movies, and I enjoyed them enough then to not bother my parents instead, but nowadays, I don't really like them. They're hilarious for sure. The girl with the pigtails that spin and make her fly, comedy gold. But as movies, I can't really get into them anymore. So when I heard that this was coming out, I was expecting it to be hilariously bad, and I like myself a funny bad movie. And somehow I was disappointed in that front because this is very much a plain, turn your brain off kids movie. Soulless, low-form content made to keep your kids from asking you to explain the government. And I know some people that think that's all kids movies can be, which is very much not true. You don't have to be rated PG-13 or R to be mature and or smart. Those are the kinds of kids movies that I personally like. And this is not that. But admittedly, it's not trying to be that, and I kind of put myself into this situation, honestly. So as something to continue prolonging the birds and the bees talk, this is fine, but I don't think this was made for anyone other than kids. Which is good, because I'm supposed to be an adult. I do not recommend it. I watched Killers of the Flower Moon, and it was my first Martin Scorsese film, which I know I'm going to get cooked alive for saying that, and I've been meaning to watch Taxi Driver in particular, but this is just the way the wind blew. This is an interesting one because I don't have much to say about it, but I want to talk about it because I really like it. There's a lot to unpack in this movie, and it does not waste a second of its 3.5-hour runtime. The pacing is really good. I never felt like a scene could have been shortened or cut without affecting the story. And the story itself is quite an important one about a dark chapter of American history that does not get discussed enough concerning Native Americans and hate crimes against them. The acting is stellar. Shocker. Robert De Niro does a great job. Shocker. Leonardo DiCaprio does a great job. But also Lily Gladstone, who steals the show as DiCaprio's wife in this. Like I said, I don't have much crazy stuff to say. It's just really good. If you have the time, go watch it. I strongly recommend it. Side note, I will definitely now be watching Wolf of Wall Street before it leaves Netflix.
Did I jump scare you? Yeah, I bet I did. You coward.
I saw Five Nights at Freddy's. That's a series this guy's from. And man, I'm not getting those 8 years of excitement back, am I? Okay, let me start off with my main positive of this movie. The animatronics look really, really good. The Jim Henson Creature Shop practically made them. They're not CGI, and they look amazing. The pizzeria itself is great. All of the Freddy Fazbear's environment feels like it was ripped right out of the video game. But seeing as how I led with my main compliment, I might as well also talk about my main complaint with this movie. I do not think it's scary, which is not great when you're a horror movie. And I think this is due to the messy tone of this movie. There are some scenes that I like where they're trying to be spooky and unsettling. But then there are scenes not long after that are pretty lighthearted and goofy, which I of course know that the game series has always had a sense of humor, and I'm not saying you can't be funny in a horror movie, but when it's not trying to be lighthearted, it takes itself super seriously, and I think if they just struck a balance between the two, it'd have worked a lot better. The plot is also not great, with it feeling like they were trying to pack a lot of different things into this one movie. The evil aunt subplot specifically stuck out as something that could be easily removed from the movie. And the characters are pretty hit or miss. Mike and Abby do well, but literally Vanessa is only there to spout exposition. Also, Matthew Lillard as the main villain of the movie is barely in it. He's there at the very beginning to help Mike get the job, fucks off for an hour and a half, and then comes back with a new name and a bunny costume, and then dies. But even though he does not have that much screen time, I do really like Matthew Lillard's performance as this character. I actually quite like the acting across the board for the most part. Though there were a few scenes that just could not be saved, like when Vanessa threatens to shoot Mike. So overall, I was hoping this movie would be better, but I think it's okay. And as a longtime Five Nights at Freddy's fan, I'm still happy that this movie even exists in the first place. But as a movie fan, I hope the sequel's better.
There's another one!
Who wanted this? Also, whose call was it to give Ed several kids in this movie? Because I just want to talk to them.
What do you get when you guzzle down sweets?
Type 2 adult onset diabetes.
And lastly, I saw Wonka, which I was a little apprehensive about it at first because the trailer did not look very good, but then it came out and people were saying that it was good, and I was like, duh? So after actually just getting back from seeing it myself, I can confidently say that I think it is cool, I guess. Let's start with the songs, because this is a musical after all. What do I think of the songs? They're decent enough. I wasn't rolling my eyes when a song came on, but I'm not gonna go check out the music afterwards. They served the scenes good enough, although the choreography and the editing during those scenes did definitely elevate those for me. I didn't hate any character, but I wasn't very emotionally attached to any of them, really. Though I did have a lot of fun with the Chocolate Cartel characters, especially Patterson Joseph. Timothée Chalamet as the title character was pretty good. He definitely seemed more innocent than previous iterations of Wonka, which for this kind of story was good enough. Maybe in between movies he had a tough time with the Oompa Loompa Union and he was never the same, I don't know. The comedy in this movie is very hit or miss. I did like some of Wonka's bits, as well as Keegan-Michael Key blowing up like the mayor from Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. Conversely, I didn't really care for any scene involving the Hugh Grant Oompa Loompa, and the CGI on him was not great either. But my favorite part of this movie is the presentation. I love the world. I love how creative it gets. I like the goofier ideas. Like I mentioned before about the Chocolate Cartel. When I heard the words Chocolate Cartel together, I immediately loved it. So all in all, I thought Wonka was surprisingly pretty good. Speaking for myself, I'm probably not going to watch this movie again for quite a while, but in terms of if you should watch it, I slightly recommend it. And that just be the end of it. If I had to pick a favorite movie I saw this year, it's probably between Guardians 3, Oppenheimer, and Talk to Me. As far as a least favorite, definitely Ghosted. Although that scene in The Flash where they peer into the other universes is probably my least favorite scene of the year, and one of my least favorite scenes ever. If there's a movie in here that I didn't mention, you can ask about it in the comments. I'm looking forward to more good movies in 2024. I hope. Sounds like someone blowing into the... I think that was my brother actually blowing into his hand or something. I don't know. There's like an entire wall I can't see.